Okay. Could I ask Prasad if? Oh, you are muted. Okay. George's iPhone. John Rogers. Somebody called WKOR. You guys aren't muted. If you could mute.
Mark, you have an option. You can mute everybody on your panel.
Yeah, I know I can. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want. Will that allow people to be able to pipe in? Yeah, they can undo it, right, if they want to. All right, I muted everybody now. Okay. Just want to make sure my video is working. Yes, it is. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this this webinar. I'm just trying to get my screen set here. Okay, I'm sorry. This has been, you probably see me on LinkedIn debating with all kinds of different people about different things. I've got my buddy Prasad out there. Him and I had a lot of conversations with the theory of constraints, Six Sigma, lean, and all that. And let me just start by saying this, that when we all learn this, Clem on the phone, Joe, we all learned this. There's really one body of knowledge that we learned for, and that was from a group called Shingijutsu, which were the first lieutenants of Taishi Ono at Toyota, right? And so we brought them over, and I was there when we brought them over, and one of the first Kaizens in the United States at a company called Jake Break, and I'll talk about that a little bit later at Danaher. That really kicked off the modern lean movement. And I was working under the leadership of Art Byrne, who actually wrote the foreword to my new book, and George Konensaker, who actually hired me. Those guys were the guys that really brought over Shingijutsu and really kicked off the lean movement that we know today. And we didn't really know we were doing it back then. All we knew is that our company was awful and we had to fix it. And that was our last straw at trying to do something right. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later as we get in. So I was lucky enough to be in the right place at the right time. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is that that's all there was out there at that time. And Six Sigma, and you'll see this in a minute, just started getting even known as Six Sigma, even though you'll find that when you look at the history, Six Sigma started a long time ago. Okay, and I'll take you through that history as we move through. So this operation management theories, and I know there's others out there, but these are the three really big ones that keep popping up on LinkedIn, and these are the ones that everybody kind of debates. And then, of course, you see all kinds of different combinations. You see Lean Sigma, Lean Six Sigma. You see, all kinds of different views on these approaches. And I will say this: when Joe started, myself, Clem, when we all started, we had it easy because there really wasn't a lot of confusion out there today. And if I was starting today, I wouldn't know what to look at. There is so much out there. And when you go under the covers of any one of these, especially lean, there's all kinds of different manifestations of existing concepts that already exist that were baked in. But, quite frankly, the consulting industry that I'm in has done everybody, in my opinion, a disservice to try to package something new and become relevant to the marketplace, because everybody wants to sell their consulting and be the latest and greatest and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, you'll find that what we do is always bring our clients back to the basics. It's not sexy. It's hard, by the way. The basics are hard. And we always want to go back to the fundamentals, okay? And resist the temptation to create new, what we call TLAs, three-letter acronyms. We have a TLA for a TLA. And resist the temptation to do that, because it just ends up confusing everybody, okay? And I think there's an enormous amount of confusion about these three things that I have on the screen right now. And hopefully I can at least give you my point of view as to how to think about these. You may or may not agree. but I'm going to give you some very rational thinking with a lot of detail as to why I think we should take a certain course of action when we try to transform our businesses. Okay, so then we can, obviously, talk more about that later in the presentation when we have the open forum for Q&A. So let me go in, and I'm going to start with, let's just talk about what operations management theory is, a little bit of academic stuff here first. I am going for my PhD, so I have to kind of be a little bit more, Bob Emiliani-like, if you will. And so, this all started with the production process, right? And started with a lot of focus on productivity, right? And everybody trying to optimize labor, which I think in a lot of respects we went overboard on productivity, because if you look at some of the clients that we work with, labor is only 6, 7, 8% of their total cost structure, and they ignore some of the real big pieces of their cost, but spend an enormous amount of overhead and time tracking labor. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with getting great productivity, but it's not about making people work harder. And you'll see that early on, guys like Frederick Taylor kind of got a black eye for trying to beat up on the operator and get more work out of them. And that's really not, I mean, obviously he wanted to increase productivity, but he did not want to, disrespect the operator. And I've got a whole nother presentation on that someday that I might give you. Maybe that will be my next one. So you can see there's a lot of theories. There's Lean, there's Six Sigma, there's TOC, demand flow technology was out there, and there's probably 100 others that you might want to put in there. So this is kind of like what we're talking about when we talk about operations theory. So who was the father? A little bit of history here. Not that's going to make your business any better by knowing this, but Fayol was kind of like the grandfather or the father of modern operational theory. Okay. And we're talking all the way back into the early 1900s. And he was the first one to kind of make this a formal discipline to study and all that. Okay. So up until then, it really wasn't viewed as a discipline that we had to be good at. Okay. And he looked at the organization, from a technical, financial, security, accounting, and management. Not really sure what he meant by accounting and financial, but anyway. And then, he looked at the 5 functions of management. Now, I think he ignored a lot of things like growth and market commercial stuff and new product development and stuff like that. Maybe that's what he meant by technical. I don't know. But anyway, it was a start, right? So he is known, if anybody ever want to, at a cocktail party, you can press all your friends and tell them that who the father of operational theory is, okay? And so that might get you a drink, or it might get you kicked out of the cocktail party. I don't know. But anyway, so that is the just a very brief history here. And then kind of off of him, everything kind of came forward and evolved off of some of the thinking that our friend here, Henry, was able to do. Okay. So, what is it, right? Operation theory, a set of practices, controlling production processes, business operations. Again, a lot of thinking around operations, okay? And a lot of times when you say operations, people don't think about the back office, they think about the shop floor, right? And that's where most people with their continuous improvement transformation start, is in fact on the shop floor. And by the way, Danaher was no different. But I think what you're going to find is that a lot of the ills that you find on the shop floor resonate from different areas in the company. For example, when the operations leader has to present bad quality issues, right? Why isn't the design guy there too? Okay. Because many times the quality is not a result of manufacturing, it's because of a bad design, either a process design or a product design, or both. If you're talking about on-time delivery in inventory turns and lead times, why isn't the commercial group there talking about the fact that we told you to make 10,000, but we only sold 2,000, and the sales and operations planning process is broken? Okay, so a lot of times we look to to the last guy in the lead time ladder, if you will, and we always look at operations as the culprit. And don't get me wrong, operations has plenty to be accountable to, but we have to kind of look at this more from a enterprise perspective and not a functional perspective. Okay, so we need to think about this more from an enterprise viewpoint and not just look at it, functionally and just do a bad job at really understanding what the root cause of some of the issues that we have really are. Okay, so anyway, the three I'm going to talk about today are Lean, Six Sigma, and TOC. And those are the things I think that get up. You've probably seen it on LinkedIn, but everybody kind of talks about all those three things. And a lot of people have messaged me privately saying, I'm confused. I don't know what to do. And they're all new to this or been doing it for a few years. And they've heard so many different things from so many different consultants. And, you might want to just include me as just one of those other consultants. But I do have a point of view. And I do have a successful track record of understanding all of this stuff and how it all fits together. So, it's really up to you to take it and do something with it or just ignore it or debate it. That's fine. But I feel compelled to get this out there so that at least you'll understand my point of view, and what you do with it is really up to you. So, I'm sorry. The guys that really, these aren't. This is not everybody who started, who was involved. You could probably add another 10 people to this, but these are some of the ones that I thought were instrumental in operations management. Okay, and I've got a few of them highlighted here. I'm afraid some of your TOC guys are going to say, "Hey, where's Goldratt? How come his picture's not up there?" But if you look at, all the way back to scientific management in Frederick Taylor, and he really, if you want to call him the father of, modern industrial engineering, he really was. Everybody seemed to have contributed to the movement in one way or another. Okay, and you look at Duran, you look at Deming. Now, the funny thing about those guys, those three guys, the first three guys here, Schuhart, Deming, and Duran, worked at the all at the same company with, as a matter of fact, they all worked, Duran and Deming worked under the guidance of Schuhart. And Schuhart was the father, if you will, of TQM, what we call total quality management. He's the guy that came up with control charting, operating control limits, SPC, basically. He's kind of like the father of SPC. But Deming kind of took it and evolved it, okay? And Deming actually brought more of the management and people side to statistical process control. And, you'll see in a minute that their work really formed the foundation of what today we call Six Sigma. And I'll talk about how that got evolved in a minute. Okay. Now, Dr. Duran, who I personally knew for a brief time in his later part of his life, Duran, and matter of fact, someday off the record, I'll tell you how him and I actually stood side by side in the men's room doing our thing and had a conversation. So one of my claims to fame is I actually took a leak with Dr. Duran. And so someday I'll tell you guys that story, but or maybe I just did. But Dr. Duran, he's a really neat guy, and he like Deming, were mentored under Schuhart, and they went on to do their things. Now, these two guys, Deming and Duran, nobody wanted to listen to them here, so they went over to Japan and really helped turn around that country in terms of their industrial revolution. And as a matter of fact, Deming was held out as a hero in Japan for what he did and the contributions he made to the Japanese turnaround. Okay, so you're going to see a lot of their thinking embedded in a lot of what Ono ended up doing, and some of the other guys. So now one thing I'll say about the Japanese, and in particular Toyota, is that they were not, and this is probably a lesson for all of us, they learned, they were open to learning from anybody, okay? And they took a lot of teachings from a lot of the guys that are listed on this chart, including Henry Ford, and Duran, and Schuhart, and Ishikawa, and one of the guys I don't have up here is Shingo. Maybe that was a miss on my part, but and they took all this stuff and they brought it in and try to figure it out for themselves when they created the Toyota production system. Okay, so a lot of great people here, as you can guess. There's probably a few missing, and so Ono, was influenced by the three Toyotas, TOYODA, and each one of them contributed different things. One was the Kaizen philosophy, one was a concept called Jidoka, which we'll talk about, and another was called just in time. Okay, so he's the one. Ono was the one that didn't invent all those things, but he put them into play and created a lot of the tools that we know today, along with the guys from Shingijutsu, which is standard work. We adopted single minute exchange to die from Shingo, and things like that. So you can see that this is there's not one person, even though we say Henry Fayol was the father of operations management. There's so many contributors to this whole movement of operations theory, and of course we have the Goldrat came along in 1984. We'll talk more about him a little bit later, and he came up with the theory of constraints, and he added to the body of knowledge. And actually he also adopted a lot of things that kind of came. One of my criticisms of TOC is that they repackaged a lot of the same concepts that already kind of existed in a different fashion. But we'll talk more about that a little bit later. So anyway, a little bit of history here, right? So I'm going to start with lean management, okay? And there's been a lot of debate on the difference between lean and TPS, Toyota Production System. And sometimes academics like to kind of put that out there and have this big debate. To me, it's a non-value added debate, in my opinion. Why spend time on that? Because all lean was introduced not by Womack and Jones, but in their book called Machine That Changed the World. It was introduced to them, to the world, to basically talk about TPS, Toyota Production System, right? And so they used the word lean, and then everything kind of took off from there in America and the rest of the world. Everybody kind of called it lean, okay? And then I think there were a lot of iterations of how people thought about lean, what lean really was. When the consultants got in and started adding all kinds of different buzzwords and different concepts, whether it's kata or Harada method or all these different things, it became more and more confusing to people, I think, and so. But I'm not going to get into the debate about what the difference between lean and TPS is. I'm just not going to have that it's non-value added. It's kind of like non-value added to debate what's world class, right? All I used to tell people at Danaher was, "You're not it. Get back to work." Okay, and we can debate about it. And if we do define it successfully, which I don't think is possible, if we do define it, then by the time you get there, it's going to be moved to another level. So why waste time on it? Just keep improving, keep moving. I always look at rate of improvement as a real key. So Ono obviously had an issue after World War II where they had scarce resources in Japan. They only had one press maybe to make a body of a car and a door and a trunk and a hood, where our counterparts over here in America, GM and those guys, had dedicated equipment. They didn't have to worry about changeover, okay, for example. Now, one of the notions everybody talks about, lean's about respect for people, and yeah, it is, and I'll talk about that. That came out, they kind of formalized that in 2001 with the respect for people concept. I wish they had named it respect for humanity, because it's not just about people. But one of the things that people don't understand is Ono's mission here, when everybody kind of, poo-poos profits and cost savings, his whole goal was to reduce cost and become competitive. And people seem to forget that. All the people that want to talk about all the politically correct stuff about respect for people and all that, and I'm not trying to down that, don't get me wrong, that's very critical. One of the main reasons why companies don't transform. But at the end of the day, Ono wanted to save costs, okay? And let's not forget about that. That's what he wanted to do. That was his number one goal. And everybody seems to forget about that over the years. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that out there so people would understand what he was really trying to do there. Okay, and it's not to say he didn't care about people, but his mission was he had to make Toyota competitive, and they weren't. And as you can see, that kind of changed over the years, didn't it? So here is, the fundamental original TPS house, okay, where you can see the three things on the bottom: Hijunka level scheduling, standard work, and Kaizen. I'm not going to go through what all these are. Jidoka and just in time. Which is a lot of principles baked into the just-in-time concept. Almost every company I go to who say they're doing lean are not, first of all, they're not doing, very rarely do I see people doing standard work. And by the way, standard work is a very specific, I don't like the way they named it. I wish they called it something different, because everybody uses the term standard work to describe job descriptions and order of operations and procedures. When you say standard work to me or any of my guys that are on the phone today, it means one thing. And if it doesn't have the elements of tack time, work sequence, and standard work and process, it's not standard work. Call it something else. Call it standard procedures. I don't care what. Don't call it standard work, okay? Because to a real lean practitioner who knows what they're talking about, when you say standard work, my mind goes to one place, all right? So, but most companies I go into don't have standard work, which, by the way, is hard to do, okay? They don't do Hijunka level. Matter of fact, a lot of the companies that rated themselves as the gold standard of lean within their organization are still using push MRP. They're not using Hijunka level scheduling. And when you ask them about their Kaizen activity, yeah, we do one a quarter. Wow, you got a 600,000 square foot plant here, and you do one a quarter? Wow. That's like, you want to become world class. That's their vision. That's like a bodybuilder wanting to be Mr. Universe going to the gym once a quarter. That's really what that's like. Okay. So all those three things on the bottom, I walk in now. Then they violate all the JIT principles, and hardly anybody is doing Jidoka. Okay. Which is hard to do. I'm working with a partner right now called Jay's, a guy named Mike Tracy, who runs that. He's a CEO. And he's bringing IoT to the party, and we're starting to talk to my clients about how IoT, Internet of Things, technology, could actually enable Jidoka, Poka-yoke. It has implications for safety and all kinds of there's like 10 or 12 different applications we have identified in manufacturing itself. So if you're interested in that, let me know, okay? Because I think the IoT technology will allow us to do Jidoka even on some old equipment that we might have doesn't have the technical platform to do so. Anyway, I walk into these companies, and same thing with Clem and Joe, and you look at these 5 things, and they don't exist. But you know what they do have? They have great yellow lines on the floor. They have great signboards. They have Gemba boards with all kinds of great measures. Okay, they do the Gemba walks. There's no root cause problem solving, by the way, but they do measure themselves, and it's called fake lean. Okay, so if you are a lean advocate and you're trying to do lean, use this one chart to say, am I doing these things? Okay, now Hijunka level schedule you'll have to grow to. You can't do that on day one. But am I doing these things? Okay, and if you're not doing lean. So I'll just let that sit for a minute. But this is where we come back to say the basics. Everybody's going to launch off and do kata. Okay, what about standard work? I think kata can work on the auspices of standard work. Okay, but so I guess what I'm trying to say here is stay true to the fundamentals if you're really going to do this. Otherwise, don't waste your time. Ono talked about the 7 wastes. This is called Muda, okay? And I think you guys probably know what all those are. A lot of companies, like we did at Danaher, added an eighth waste called, we called it loss of creativity, or, you know, some people put in respect for people, or, you know, waste from not asking your operators or your employees or your executives what they think. So there's that, unused creativity as an eighth waste that sometimes we add on to this. But I wanted to be pure on this presentation, is talk about the 7 that Ono talked about, which is basically, you know, these 7 waste here. Again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these right now, but this was a foundation of what he thought about. And when you get into some other types of waste, everybody talks about muda, but mura and muri, which is unevenness and overburdening and our unreasonableness, what I found in my experience is that mura and muri really talk more to policy waste. When, you have a sales organization that is trying to sell as much product, incentivizing customers to take stuff they don't need, therefore violating just-in-time principles, okay? Discounting the product and throwing, I had one client that took 30% of their monthly orders came in the last 2 days of the month because sales had to meet their quota and get their bonus. And the sales guys got their cruises and their vacations and their awards. But it buried the plant that was trying to do a Junker level scheduling. Okay, so the enterprise has to work together in order to understand all these concepts. And many times I found Mura and Muri are a result of policy, and also, quite frankly, a disrespect for people. As a matter of fact, if you're overseeing an organization that has a lot of firefighting, a lot of stress, a lot of rework, a lot of errors, that is a disrespect for people issue. Okay, and you're responsible as a leader for having that happen. All right. So anyway, so there's other types of waste that we talk about here with lean, not just Muda. Now let's talk about Six Sigma. Okay. Six Sigma is found. By the way, lean is kind of found on the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act principle that we learned from Deming, right? And I know there's been a few iterations of PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, whatever it is. I think everybody comes up with different variations. I think even Deming did it later on in his life. But the Plan, Do, Check, Act philosophy is kind of embedded in the lean thinking. And we even use that in strategy deployment, which is a big part of the Danaher business system, which maybe someday I'll do another session on that. But DMAIC, define, measure, analyze, improve, control, a lot of similarities. I could probably put PDCA right alongside of that and kind of say, I like the DMAIC process. I like the thinking that goes into DMAIC. And, I probably would ask, if I were to redo DMAIC, is put a step before it. It might screw up the acronym, but collect data first, right? And I think that's kind of embedded in the define thing. But you can't just define a problem without having data, okay? You have to collect the data and then define the problem. And as a matter of fact, you may find there are several problems that you end up you're going to need to solve, as opposed to just one, right? So, but I think the guys at Six Sigma, and I got trained in this. I'm actually just a green belt. I got trained in this 25 years ago. So I do think there's a lot of data collection up front in the define phase to make sure you don't just start out with the problem, but you actually collect the data to do so. But anyway, it's all set up with the DMAIC process. Okay, I view Six Sigma as a statistical problem-solving approach. Okay, using statistics. A lot of it has its foundation in Schuhart's statistical process control. SPC is kind of like what TPS was to the Danaher business system. SPC with Schuhart was really the foundation of what became Six Sigma. Okay, and I will talk more about the tools in each one of these categories as we go through. Again, a Six Sigma in lean in statistical terms is 3.4 parts defects per million, which sounds like that's pretty good, right? It all depends. Not if you fly an airplane. So I actually did the math and said that if the airlines operated their flights at a Six Sigma level, there would be one crash somewhere in the world every 3 days. Okay. So the airlines cannot, now they're not Six Sigma in a lot of other regards, don't get me wrong. Uh, on time, departures and screw ups like that. But when it comes to flying an aircraft in the air, which is a very complicated thing to do, they're pretty good at it. Okay. And so they can't operate at Six Sigma. I don't know what their Sigma level is, but it's unbelievable. And so I'll say to clients, well, is flying a complicated aircraft safely way better than Six Sigma? Tougher than assuring quality in a ballpoint pen that you're manufacturing? You gotta be kidding me, you know? And so, it all depends on your attitude towards quality, right? And we can get into the old thing about, well, it's gonna cost a lot of money to assure that kind of quality. No, it's not. It's actually costing you a lot of money to have bad quality, but let's leave that conversation for another day. So the guys at the Six Sigma crowd is trying to get us down to 3.4 defects. There is a way that people measure it to make themselves look better. Motorola did this. You can count opportunities, or you can count. It all depends on how you look at what an opportunity is. So, for example, if a cell phone has, let's just say, 1,000 parts in it, and you had one defect in that cell phone, that's 1 out of 1,000, and you calculate your sigma level that way. Okay, so 1 out of 1,000, what is that? 10,000 ppm? I'm not sure. Do the math, but I might have my zeros off. But the way we looked at it at Danaher was we looked at it from the customer's perspective. The cell phone didn't work. So from the customer's perspective, it was 1 out of 1. And that's how we measured it. Okay. Motorola would tell you that they were 5 Sigma. Yeah, they were, by looking at opportunities. The customers didn't view them as 5 Sigma. They did. And that's a problem, right? So, if my steering wheel falls off my car, I can say that's 1 out of 20,000 parts. That's kind of important, right? So to me, that's 1 out of 1. So there's a lot of training involved in learning Six Sigma. Not everybody has the aptitude to do it. Okay. It takes a long time to get trained, and projects take a long time, and we'll get into that a little bit more. Okay. I am not discounting Six Sigma at all. As a matter of fact, you're going to see later that I included it as a key part of the Danaher business system, but we'll talk more about that a little bit later. Here's the evolution of Six Sigma. Okay, going back to Schuhart in 1925. Okay, then you can see how General MacArthur actually asked Deming to come to Japan to rebuild Japan, because MacArthur was involved in rebuilding Japan after the war, World War II, which my father fought at. He actually fought at the Battle of Iwo Jima, and then of course Edward Deming evolved everything out of this. He came up with evolved SBC and the 14 points of management, plan, do, check, act. So Deming had an unbelievable amount of contribution. Duran with quality control system. So they kind of complemented each other. Duran, when I asked Duran about Deming, he said, everybody thought we were adversaries. He said, we were friends and we worked together. So we just did different things, actually, if you look at some of the stuff that Duran did, a lot of what we do with strategic deployment is kind of baked into his thinking in what he calls strategic quality deployment, right? He did it from a quality perspective, but a lot of the fundamentals are there. And I remember he told me one time, he said to me, if we had quality systems with the same level of rigor and discipline as the accountants have in their accounting controls, our quality would be 10 times better in this country. Okay. Actually said that. And, and then of course Enron came along and that kind of blew that theory, but but it's true. Right? You think about the controls, and by the way, when we get into lean accounting some other day, we talk about those controls that the accountants put in were culprits to a lot of the batch thinking that had to happen in manufacturing. It was a tail wagging the dog. And we kind of turned it around in 1989 when I wrote the first lean accounting program and dispelled a lot of the traditional, accounting things that were screwing us up in our thinking and our behaviors, but subject for another day. It wasn't until 1988 when Motorola won the Baldwin Award, and Bob Gavin and Bill Smith, actually really is more Bill Smith than anybody. Bob Gavin was the CEO. That's where they formalized the concept of Six Sigma. Okay, it happened at Motorola. My buddy Gary Cohn is out there. I'm sure he'd be shaking his head right now, saying, "Yep," because he was there. And and Bill, I actually had a chance to meet Bill Smith. Conan Saker actually sent me out to talk to him, and actually I met him and talked about Six Sigma. And the DMAIC process was formulated, and then subsequent to that, so I would say the modern Six Sigma moniker, if you will, got kicked off in '89 with Bill Gavin, Bill Smith, I should say, who since passed away, by the way, God rest his soul, and that's where this whole thing took off. And then you had all kinds of other companies like General Electric. Everybody kind of got on the Six Sigma bandwagon after that, and a lot of people came along and claimed they were the fathers. You had Michael Harry claiming he was the father of Six Sigma, and a lot of these guys, all they did is kind of repackage what's already been done by some of these other people. But I kind of look at this as the history of Six Sigma. If anybody has any other perspective on that, please email me and let me know. But this is how my research came out in terms of how this whole thing came together. Okay. So there you go. That's a little bit of a timeline and history on this. And then last but not least, we have TOC, Theory of Constraints, where Goldratt came up with a six-step implementation process. So, if you look at this, you kind of say to yourself, this is kind of like his version of the DMAIC or PDCA for lean. So this was kind of like his thought process in terms of, identify the goal, the constraints, exploit the constraint, subordinate it, increase the capacity, and start the process over. And, it's a continuous loop. So this was all done through a book in the 80s called The Goal. And if you guys remember what he called a constraint, he named it the Herbie, right? So anybody says to you, yeah, that's our Herbie over there. I've been accused of being a Herbie, by the way. Don't do this to people, though. It's not nice. So anyway, he came out with this concept. Okay, he's also done a lot of other things with project management, and I think when I get to the tools, you're going to see some of the project management thinking that he did that sort of integrated with TOC. Okay, so when I look at the three, if I would kind of put a check sheet together here and say, okay, what are the three things look like side by side? Okay, in one way, the lines I have drawn between all three of these really shouldn't be lines. I think there's a lot of Venn diagram stuff going on here where they kind of overlap each other to a degree. But in an attempt to kind of delineate a little bit, I tried, right? So, when I look at the goal of all of these, and maybe that's the wrong word to use in terms of TOC, but I use the word goal in terms of what's your objective, right? Maybe I should have said objective. Reduce waste, reduce variation, manage constraints. Or maybe I should have said reduce constraints, right? Maybe both. Reduce and manage constraints is really what TOC is trying to do, I think. How do they do it? PDCA, DMAIC, 6 steps on TOC. Lean is focus, flow and waste reduction. Six Sigma is problem solving, and TOC is really focused around constraints. The primary effect: reduce lead time and defects and costs. All right. I think Six Sigma is all about reducing variation, of course, reducing defects and all that. And TOC, even though they talk a lot about all the other things I just mentioned, it really is all about throughput. And of course, you can't get fast throughput if you don't do things like variation reduction or defect reduction or changeover or things like that, right? So so that's how I saw that. The characteristics of these, I think, go anywhere from what I would call more theory. And maybe that's not really fair on the TOC side because there are some tools, and I'll talk about some of those tools in a minute, but a lot of theory and I found when I looked at TOC, there was a lot of bare bones uh, tactics that were missing for me. Okay, so it wasn't as prescriptive as I thought some of the other two were. Okay, and that's one of the problems I had with it. So that's why I called it theory. I think when you look at Six Sigma, the way I view it is a set of statistical problem solving tools, and I'll get into those in a minute. And Lean, I think, is really based on a philosophy, and it's also based on tools. Okay, philosophy and principles and tools. So it kind of has both. There's a philosophical overriding way of thinking with Lean, and I'm sure a lot of the other two camps are going to say, yeah, there is there too. But that's the overriding thinking, and I think if I were to probably say there is a difference between Lean and TPS, is that I like to think about what we did with the Danaher business system as an enterprise business approach, not a manufacturing approach. Okay, and so there's a big difference there. All right, and some of the criticisms, I think, Lean, very difficult to emulate Toyota, and one of the reasons, in a subject for another day, but is it takes an incredible amount of discipline. Okay, an incredible amount of discipline to do Lean. Okay, which is one of the reasons, and there's many, and it's in my new book, that people fail at it. Okay, probably you can say the same thing about the other two as well. I think one of the criticisms with Six Sigma of many is it's difficult to do, difficult to train, difficult for employee engagement because of the sophistication of it. And in many cases is an inappropriate use, because a lot of times I found Six Sigma consultants trying to improve a process that, had they thought about it with a lean viewpoint, that process wouldn't exist at all. Okay, we'd eliminate that process. So it's a question of doing the right things or doing things right. Right. So you got to think about that as you go through. Um, my criticism, anyway, when I say criticism, is that I think TOC has repackaged a lot of existing concepts, and I'll talk about that in a minute. I really do think, and one of my challenges for the TOC crowd is, show me anything that TOC brings to the party that doesn't exist in the other two categories. Okay, anything. All right. And don't give me a buzzword, because I'll tell you the buzzword that I've looked at, and I'll talk about it in a minute. Those buzzwords that you come up with for whatever tools you want to put under the umbrella are just repackaged versions of something that already exists, especially if you look at it as to what the goal of those tools are. Okay. So in that, when we looked at this from the Danaher business system, and we did look at TOC, we just thought it was a lot of repackaging and very confusing. And we didn't want to confuse the organization. So we stayed away. We did talk about Six Sigma and brought that in, and I'll talk about how we did that in a minute. But I just thought that the repackaging of a lot of concepts that already existed, I didn't see anything unique. Maybe you guys can prove me wrong. I did a lot of study on this, a lot of research, and I really didn't see anything totally unique. As a matter of fact, some of the thinking in some of the tools under TOC are counter to the lean philosophy, and I'll talk about that in a minute as well. Here are the tools I came up with, and I know they're probably not, it's not a complete list in any regard for all three of these, okay? But these are some of the main tools that I came up with. And you can obviously, there's a very eclectic group here. I know that I just read a book by a friend of mine on TOC, and he talked about cell design. And all it really said was, hey, we're going to create a cell. But there's really nothing fundamental in the TOC umbrella that talks about how you design a cell. Okay. As a matter of fact, if there is, they probably borrowed it from the lean camp anyway. Six Sigma has a lot of unique tools that you could argue do not exist in any of the other two. Of course, statistical process control, which is the 1, 2, 3, fourth one down, again, like I said to you earlier, formed the foundation for Six Sigma, and then everything kind of took off from that. So you see a lot of great tools in here that is mentioned. All these tools obviously have to exist, have to be used at the appropriate time, and all that type of thing. So, matter of fact, I think even I'm looking at that list right now. I think I have a couple missing in there, but anyway, you get the idea. So, anyway, this is how I kind of laid out the tool set. If you want to talk about tools, okay. And so I'm going to get into some of these a little bit more detail in a minute as we go through. So I think, though, that Six Sigma and TOC do have a rather myopic focus, one on variation, the other one on constraints, and doesn't offer the eclectic flexibility, as the sign says here, to address a multitude of problems that an organization might have. Okay. So that's my thinking on this. And let me get into a little bit more detail. When I look at TOC in particular, okay, there's a lot of data on here, and you'll get to read it when you get this presentation. But, I just took 3 or 4 key tools that are part and parcel to TOC and talked about, what they were, and talked about how it conflicts with lean thinking, okay? I didn't really see anything that conflicted with lean thinking in Six Sigma, except for it's very difficult with Six Sigma, in my opinion, in my experience, to engage the operator, okay? Where lean, I think you do it on Monday morning, first thing first, right? Six Sigma, a lot tougher. When I asked a Six Sigma consultant, how do you engage your operators? He says, oh, we have them fill out check sheets. Great. That's not engagement to me. When you're filling out a check sheet on a gauge, that's not engagement. And so that's probably my one biggest criticism of that. I got others too, because I think a lot of Six Sigma advocates don't step back and look at doing things right. They look at doing the right thing. They look at doing things right, and those things that they're looking at may or may not need to be done to begin with. So some of that going on too. So another criticism, I actually have a white paper called The Six Sigma Hysteria, and I talk about the pros and cons of Six Sigma and that, and it's on LinkedIn, and you guys can download it. It's in my book too, by the way, when I'll talk about in a minute. So anyway, I look at this. One of the biggest criticisms I have is the whole notion of TAC time. Okay, every time I bring it up, if you read Red's book, it's mentioned, not TAC time, but it's kind of like, hey, when you get done with a constraint, you go after the next constraint. And my notion was that if I have a constraint, because every operation has a constraint, and it's performing within the auspices of the TAC time, then I don't need to screw with the constraint. Okay. For example, if I have a machine that has a cycle time of 2 minutes, and it's my longest cycle time, but my TAC time is 3 minutes, I don't need to improve that to 3 minutes or reduce it. I got that reversed. If I have so I don't need to improve it if it's working within TAC time. Okay. Now, I may sit there and say, you know what? My sales and operations planning process is telling me my volume for that product line or that value stream is going up, and that will be a constraint in 6 months. All right, I'm going to be proactive about it, and I'm going to work to get that constraint down. But I'm not going to put engineering resources on a constraint that now I'm going to challenge. If I have capacity, I'm going to challenge the sales organization to say, hey, I've got more capacity here, guys. Fill it up, man. Let's take some market share. Okay. That's a business decision more than anything else. But that should come into the S&OP process, and you'll address a constraint as you need to address a constraint. Okay. So that's one of the biggest criticisms I have here. The other is that the drum buffer rope philosophy automatically assumes you're going to put in inventory, okay, as opposed to thinking about flow. And we have a notion in lean that says flow first, pull where you can't, never push, right? So the whole concept of going after the DBR concept automatically suggests you put inventory in without stepping back and saying to yourself, how do I eliminate the fact that I need the inventory. Because remember, one of the big criticisms with lean is everybody kind of goes after Kanban, right? And maybe this buffer is what, you know, GoRat's version of Kanban was, okay? But Kanban isn't a mission of failure to do one piece flow, right? So everybody wants to move towards Kanban, and it has its place and all that. But you should really start thinking about how do you eliminate Kanban and go to flow, pure flow, and eliminate pull altogether, right? Um, some of these other thinking things over here, the current reality tree and future and all that, really to me gets handled in value stream mapping, okay? Where you have a current state and a future state, and it's a lot more detailed than the example I've seen on those trees. By the way, I've got somebody on the line right now that is not muted. I don't know if I can see that or not, but I'm getting some feedback on here. Okay, so if you guys can make sure you're muted, I'd appreciate it. So to me, it lacked all the examples I saw on the reality trees, if you will, were lacking data and details. Okay, in a plan that says, here in order is what our Kaizen plan is going to be, and that seemed to be missing to me with TOC as well, because I didn't see any facility to actually do Kaizen. There is actually a process to do Kaizen. There's certain steps that you do to do a Kaizen, okay? I didn't see that baked into any of the literature that I looked at. I did a lot of extensive research. Maybe you guys can show me how TOC does what we call Kaizen, right? But just analyzing it with these documents is not enough. Same with value stream mapping. If you just do a value stream, nothing's going to get better. But what's going to happen, you got to do Kaizen, right? And so that was a miss to me. And then on the throughput accounting, being an ex-accountant, I just thought that some of the things that he thought about here was totally off base. His ROI uses inventory, not assets. Okay, and that is a misnomer. If he was going to rename something, I wish he would have renamed that one. Using sales volume, sales dollars as an inventory turn instead of cost of sales, you've got all kinds of pricing fluctuations in a sales dollar number that will give you false readings. If you want to look at it from a cause and effect perspective, false readings on your inventory turns. Okay, so that's why we always advocate you use cost of sales, because the inventory is valued at cost of sales, and you're using an apples and apples comparison to do that. Okay, so I thought that was just a miss. Now, he wasn't an accountant. I forget what his PhD was in, but that to me was just going to give you all kinds of different false readings, either thinking you're getting better or worse when either you are or you're not. So, and then productivity using throughput, which his example was sales dollars, divided by operating expense, and what he viewed as operating expense was the money spent, including inventory and equipment, to turn raw materials into revenue throughput, was not a good input output equation to me. Okay, so I thought the inputs were off and the outputs were off, right? So you want to take your outputs. I kind of got that equation a little bit backwards here, but you want to take your outputs divided by inputs, whether it's units divided by hours, however you want to look at it. But in the denominator and in the numerator, you want to make sure that you don't have an artificial fluctuation in those numbers that give you false readings. Okay, so I thought the whole throughput accounting was totally misleading. And our approach, of course, is with lean accounting, where we direct cost as much overhead as possible to the value stream and to the product. And I've got a whole dissertation on that. I think I did a lean accounting thing a couple months ago, and you'll get this if I have your email, you'll get that that link for that webinar. Okay, so anyway, these are some of the real problems I had here with some of the fundamentals in TOC. Okay, so that was just the way I thought about it, and I just want to talk about a couple things here. I'm showing you this one here because this is something I did personally did back in 2005 with GE Money. It's a retail credit card group, and this was a very famous case study. And by the way, this is data that they showed at an investor conference, and Harvard actually read an article on this. And when Jeff Immelt saw this particular Kaizen, that's when they shifted from Six Sigma to Lean in earnest. Okay. Now there are guys at GE that were doing Lean when it wasn't popular. As a matter of fact, Todd Waterman, good friend of mine, John Boucher, who are two of the best Lean guys in the world, in my opinion, were doing Lean at GE Aircraft Engines up in Rutland, Vermont. When Jack Welch, they told me that they thought Jack would fire them if they found out he was doing Lean. They were doing Lean, and they brought in Shingijutsu. They brought in Nakao. Okay, they did 3P, all the great stuff in the around the mid '90s. So they had this underground Lean movement going at GE all along, but they had to keep it quiet because the mantra of the day was Six Sigma. Everybody had to do Six Sigma, right? So, but when we did this, Welch was no longer CEO, and Immelt was. This process, it's a retail credit card process. Little credit card machines that you'd have in your restaurant or whatever. You see them all over the place. Well, if you're a vendor, if you own a restaurant, let's say, and you call up for an application, it took you 63 days to get your product and do your first transaction. Okay, the amount of time it took to do to process the transaction, an hour and a half. But it took 63 days for the customer. Now, what these guys, they said to me when I got there, they said, "You want to see our Six Sigma work on this?" I said, "Sure." They sat me down at a desk and they gave me a report that was literally about 8 inches thick. Okay. And it had all kinds of data and all kinds of analysis. Okay. Sure, there's a lot of good stuff in there. But the whole notion was they were trying to take the hour and a half down to a half an hour. That's the wrong thing to focus on. You had to focus on the lead time. Okay. Hey, I'm all about taking an hour and a half down to an hour to half an hour. Don't get me wrong. Okay. That wasn't what was strategic. What was strategic is to take 63 days, and they wanted to go to 20. And I challenged them and I said, "No, guys, you're GE. You told me you're the best in the world. It's going to take you it's going to take you 20 days to do an hour and a half's worth of work. How about one day?" Which to me is still too long. How about one day? And they agreed to one day. And over the course of like 9 months, we got it down to one day. Okay. As a result of that, and by the way, using value stream mapping and a lot of lean concepts. Okay. We run a bunch of Kaizens during that 9-month time frame to do that. After one day, after they got down to one day, customers weren't leaving them anymore, because what was happening is when they put the application in, it took 63 days, they went somewhere else to the competition. We didn't let them do that. We captured them, right? They got their stuff like the next day, the kit and everything. They were up and running. So we also brought in voice of the customer. We brought in customers here to do some focus groups on this one too, to get really good feedback. So the first year, they realized $216 million of additional revenue in that division. The guy that ran it, they did a video on it. I have the video. The guy that ran it got promoted to officer. Anyway, the rest was history, right? So anyway, just to show you where Six Sigma could be misapplied, and it didn't address the lead time. It didn't address the whole value stream. It addressed the work involved in actually processing an application. Okay, and that was the wrong thing to work on. And that's the example I'm trying to give you here. This is where it all started. This is Jake Break, where I became CFO, and then I ran the Asian operations general manager. And this is where I first learned lean. And I'll let the numbers talk for themselves, but you can actually see what this thing did for us. Okay. And in the early 90s, George Sherman, our CEO, came to me and said, "Hey, Mark, I want you to do for Danaher what you guys did for Jake Break." And to make a long story short, that kind of gave rise to what we now call the Danaher business system. So I went to work for him for 9 years and architected the DBS system. Guys on the phone right now, like Joe and Clem, were a big part of that in terms of contributing to a lot of different aspects of that. Clem brought in value stream mapping to us. We weren't using value stream mapping until, I don't know when that was, Clem, mid to late 90s. And so we brought that in, and that elevated us to the next level. One of the big plays in Danaher business system was the strategy deployment process, actually what Danaher calls policy deployment. That was a huge uplift to how we thought about it as a business system. But it all started right here at Jake Break, and you can see some of the crazy numbers that are run here. And we basically quadrupled the business with the same headcount, almost, roughly. Look at productivity, look at lead time. Still not great on the quality side. 500 ppm is not stellar, but it's a hell of a lot better than 75,000, right? So anyway, that's high-priced Connecticut UAW workforce, and we had a 30% EBIT number plus at that time frame. Okay, so this is where the modern lean movement got its spark, and I was just lucky enough to happen to be there at the time. That basically means I'm an old guy. And then the Danaher business system, I just got you some numbers here over a 20-year history. Of course, this only stops in 2016. And Danaher has transformed itself greatly over the years because they spun off Fortive into Fortive, all their old companies. And I would say that when I left in 2001, there's only one company left in their portfolio that was there when I was there, and that was TOC, which is a water quality system out of Colorado, and they're global as well. So they transformed themselves with some very mundane, metal banging type of companies, tool companies, Jake Breaks of the world, which they don't own anymore, and all that, and then went into more scientific management type companies, equipment and dental and scientific, human life needs type stuff, water, stuff like that, right? So almost you can argue it's recession proof, which is really good on their part. So when I look at Danaher and I look at Toyota, I'll argue that Toyota is probably, in my opinion, the best manufacturing company in the world. They are. I've been there many, many times and studied them, and also worked in some of their suppliers, which are pretty unbelievable in their own right, in Japan. And matter of fact, they've got some great companies right here in the United States. Matter of fact, they have a forklift company in Indiana. And when I asked the VP of operations what their inventory turns were, he said, our turns are 15. And I said to him, I walked away, I said, that's not that great, right? Yeah, I mean, you go back to Jake Break here, we were turning, where we 25 times, right? Yeah, 15. I later found out that was 15 per month. Okay, so what's 15 times 12? Was that 180? They're turning inventory 180 times. Mixed model forklift line. Okay, so totally off the charts in terms of the way you have to think, right? So these are some. Now Danaher was, I don't know where they are today, but at one point in time, not too long ago, the third best stock in the United States, the U.S. stock to buy in the United States. The top one was Home Depot, only by about a tenth of a percentage point, and some other company, I can't remember what it was number two. But anyway, Danaher was, and a lot of the success came from two things really. One, great leadership and great strategic thinking. George Sherman is an unbelievable strategic thinker. I learned so much from him, and also Larry Culp, who now George mentored and is now the CEO of GE. So Larry, matter of fact, Larry and I worked together quite a bit, and so, we had great leadership. Okay, we also had DBS, and we put those two things together. It's unbelievable, right? And now Tom Joyce, who's a good friend of mine and also a thought partner with me in developing DBS, is now CEO. So those three, DBS has survived three CEOs, which is fortunate because many companies don't have that nicety. Mitch and Steve Rales, who were the founders of Danaher, are making sure they put the right guys in place, or gals, that are going to be true to DBS, because they are true believers of DBS, and that really is their magic sauce at the end of the day. Okay. So recommendation and conclusion, a lot of stuff on this slide. I think I talked mostly about it. So I won't read everything to you here. But I kind of compare, the three and all that. And maybe what I'll do is, instead of kind of going through the gory details again, I'll go right to the recommendation. Okay. If I were starting out today, I would say to you, Use lean as your enterprise transformation philosophy. Okay. Incorporate TPS as a foundation, but grow your business system more than TPS. Okay. Like we did DBS. Because if you look at DBS, and maybe that's a webinar for another day, not only there's HR tools, there's IT tools. Joe Rutz, who's on the line, is an ex-CIO. He incorporated a lot of admin stuff that Joe and Clem put in, right? Growth tools, new product development. It was a very eclectic strategy deployment, eclectic system. So we use TPS as a foundation, and a lot of the Toyota production system thinking and philosophy, especially respect for people, and JIT philosophies and things like that, are resident at a high level in DBS. And then also we have the ground floor tools, but we added tools to the toolbox. We didn't just stick with TPS. And that's why it's a business system. So why I say Toyota is the best manufacturing company in the world, they are not the best business in the world. Okay. Since 1997, they returned an average of 6% to their shareholders since 1997. And Danaher is up in around the 22% range. Okay. Now, just because you have great financial performance does not make you a great company. But my view is if you don't have great financial performance, you're not a great company. Toyota is a great manufacturer. They're not a great company. You want to know why? Because in my opinion, they're in a bad business. The automotive business is not a business where you're going to knock the socks off for shareholders. Okay. And Danaher would never get involved in the automotive business, and for a lot of different reasons. And as a matter of fact, we had automotive supplies. We had Fayette Tubular in the early days. We got rid of them. Okay, we got rid of those companies because we did not want to be in the automotive space where everything was cost focused, right? So we just don't think Toyota, I don't think, is a great business. I think it's a great manufacturer. A great business from a shareholder perspective, okay? From an employee perspective, they're phenomenal. From a customer perspective, God, I don't think there's a better car made out there, right? My wife owns one. I've owned Lexus. I've owned Toyotas. Although I'm partial to the BMWs. I love German engineering. So I think you need to, my recommendation would be transform the company with lean in mind, okay? I think Six Sigma has a place, and it did at Danaher and DBS, but it needs to sit alongside all the other tools in the toolbox. Do not elevate Six Sigma as the end-all be-all. It would be analogous to if you're a home builder and you tell your guys that, hey, we're gonna just basically focus on a hammer, okay? We're gonna use a hammer. Yeah, but wait a minute, I've got to dig a hole. Don't matter. We're doing hammers. Okay. We're not using shovels. We're not using picks. We're not using cranes. We're not using saws. We're using hammers. And that's what happened at GE, where they became myopically focused on one tool to solve all their problems. And I didn't make it up, but you know the old adage that if the only tool you have in your tool belt is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. Okay. And so I think Six Sigma belongs in a transformation, a lean transformation, but it's got to sit alongside, and you pick that tool out when you need it. And let me give you a case study. I had a client at a foundry, lost foam foundry, and to actually make the foam for the lost foam foundry process, there were like 25, 30 variables, and you could never control the variables when they made the foam. So I suggested they bring in a Six Sigma consultant, and the head of lean wanted to do Six Sigma for the whole company, train everybody on it. Why would you do that? Why would you, in the meantime, these guys are trying to do one-piece flow, cell design, standard work, level loaded scheduling, and he's going to deflect everybody in the company to train them on Six Sigma, which is a long haul, when he only needed it in one spot. He needed a DOE over in the foundry area. So bring it in, train a couple of people on it. Don't upset the whole organization on that. I'm not saying that you don't want to train people on all the tools, but you have to be smart about what you're going to do. So he wanted to elevate this to something bigger than it really should have been. Okay. So I don't think Six Sigma is a philosophy or it's something that you aspire to. As a matter of fact, there are some studies that said that 90+% of the companies that led with a Six Sigma approach trailed the S&P 500 in stock performance. Okay, so it fits in the transformation. As a matter of fact, at Danaher, we called it variance reduction Kaizen, VRK. We did not want to call it Six Sigma. Matter of fact, they had to fight a bunch of Six Sigma guys that came in from GE who wanted to uproot DBS and replace it with this. I spent about a year fighting these guys. I won, but it was a big distraction. Okay. When it comes to TOC, if you have tools, and I haven't found any yet, that are new and do something different that doesn't already exist in either Lean or Six Sigma, then bring it in. Okay. I just hadn't been able to find it. And I would challenge all the TOC guys out there today to let me know what's different about whatever you guys do with TOC. What is a unique tool that doesn't get handled in some other fashion with Lean? I did a lot of research, a lot of studying on this, spent a lot of time on this, and I couldn't find anything that was truly unique. One guy told me the other day, well, our thinking process is unique. I'm not sure what that means, but so I rejected bringing in TOC into DBS because I thought it was going to confuse the heck out of the organization. Okay, with all the new jargon, all the new buzzwords that Goldratt came up with, drum buffer rope and all that, and so I just discounted that altogether and did not want to introduce any of the TLAs, if you will, 3-letter acronyms, into the Lean lexicon, the DBS lexicon, because I just thought it was duplicative and it was confusing. That was my view. I know a lot of people are going to probably disagree with me, but I did not see that. And the other thing is I still am waiting to understand one company that totally transformed itself with TOC. Just like I can't really find anybody who's done it with Six Sigma. Okay. So, when you can show me that, then maybe I'll listen, but I haven't seen it yet. And I have a lot of people, send me examples of Kaizens that were done with TOC, but not a total company transformation. Okay. I still, I'm trying to understand where in the Six Sigma toolbox, go back to this chart. Okay. Do we address quality? Do we address changeover? Do we address machine uptime and TPM type stuff? Do we address preventing defects, right? We talk about it, but we don't, those are the reasons why you have a capacity problem, okay? Where's standard work? Where's flow, okay? How do we talk about, they do have some semblance of what I would maybe call problem solving, but there are a lot of problems. If you look at the list on Lean, 5Y, CDAC, process mapping, all kinds of different approaches, Pareto, all that stuff. And of course, if you go to Six Sigma, there's a whole plethora of different types of problem solving tools. They're more probably on the statistical side than anything else. But so I have yet to really understand where it adds anything that doesn't already exist. And I'll stay open to listen, but I've done a lot of time, a lot of discussion, a lot of research. I've asked a lot of questions, and quite frankly, I haven't had an answer that was satisfactory to me. Okay. So I'm going to stop it there for now and just ask if there's any questions or comments. Open up your mic and have at it.
Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Yes, I have 2 questions. The first one is, I don't know if there is a link between Deming and Taiichi Ohno. Do you know if Toyota tried to introduce SPC or total quality management in the middle 80s or 70s? I don't know, because
Yes.
I've never seen a link between Deming 14 management principles and Taiichi Ohno, for example. So it's quite strange for me.
Well, I'll tell you a story about that. Answer first of all is yes. Okay. However, the thinking evolved at least to Iwata and Nikao, who were the 2 principals of Shingijutsu. They could not understand why Americans use SPC. If you're going to check 1 out of 15, you should check them all. Because their question was, what about the other 14? Because one of the principles in Lean is not to allow sure, assure quality of the product before it moves on to the next process or to the customer, right? Well, those 14 aren't assured, okay, that the quality is in check. And of course, there's a difference between quality assurance and quality control, but control is more inspection, assurance is building in the quality. But you have not verified the quality of those 14 items because you only checked 1 out of 15. So they thought that that was a violation. SPC was a violation of the philosophy. Now, Deming did work with Toyota and he did introduce SPC, but what they learned at Toyota was that they needed to build quality into the process, not inspect it in later with SPC or what else. Okay. Now, little story that people don't want to talk to you about, and I do like to talk about the errors that we made in DBS, and this actually happened at Jake Break. When we went to Toyota, we noticed that they weren't using SPC. So no, we did. Dummy us, right? We said, Koenigsegg, all of us, we said, hey, they're not using SPC. We're not using it anymore either, right? So we got rid of it. Guess what happened to our quality? All right, went down to tubes because we didn't build in. We had no Pokyokes, no Jidokas. We didn't build quality into the process. We just took our lifeline at that time. Although you can criticize it, that was what we needed. We needed SPC, okay, to be able to. Now, I always push people when I do cell design. I want you to build into standard work that you're checking every part. Okay. Well, it takes too long. I don't care. Build it in. You're not going to allow 14 parts to go to the next operation unchecked. That's a violation of the principle. Put the labor in, put the process in. So, well, it's a CMM. It takes too long. Well, then find another way to do it. Okay. And you got to force the issue with that. Okay. Would you get on an aircraft, fly an airline that only checks 1 out of 15 airplanes? No, you would not. Right. So, why would we do that in operations too, right? So always look at your real life situation. So I would say to you, yes, they did listen to Deming, but then they evolved and actually built quality in where they don't really use it all that much anymore. Okay, I hope that works. Does that work, Christian?
Yes, thank you very much for your answer. And the second question, Mark, is of course about Lean and TPS. Talk about waste reduction, improvement process, standard work, Yunka Kaizen, a lot of stuff. I know that there is no like a straight path in order to achieve sustained success introducing Lean or TPS, but I like to know if, for example, of course, we need to understand the business goals or objectives through strategic deployment, for example, or Hoshin country.
Right.
But do you think that the value stream mapping tool should be the first one that we should try to implement if we want to address a constraint, if we want to work on a difficult that is that our current business is going through? Or I mean, because I've understood that if you work with the value stream, we are working with the current state, then we have to look at the future state, we have to eliminate waste, identify waste, do a lot of Kaizen events, engage more people, or there is a different path. That's what I like to know.
Well, yeah, it's a real good question, by the way, Christian. If we lived in a perfect world, I would say absolutely, right? We don't. Okay. And here's how I look at it. If your house is on fire and you have your family's on the 3rd floor, they're screaming to get out, and you have a fire hose sitting there, okay, and you also have the fire prevention manual that you need to update and review, okay, and then do some root cause problem solving to find out how the fire started. What are you going to do? You're going to pick up the hose and put the fire out, right? So my first thing is, if you have those kind of obvious things that are hurting your customer, hurting you, okay, don't take a step back and be pedantic about it and say, we're going to do a value stream map, okay, to really understand. You already know your family's going to die, okay? If you don't pick up that hose and put the fire out, they're going to die. Okay. So the fact that you do or don't know why the fire started and what the root cause was is not relevant if your family's dead, right? Apply that to business. All right. And so one thing I'll tell you is don't become a slave to these tools. All right. Think about it. Think about, a lot of times if you think about how you would run your life and use examples like I just gave you, and then when we run businesses are totally different sometimes, right? We don't think about it that way, right? So what's going to be the most obvious thing? Use common sense, which we all have, and just ask the question. Don't become a slave that you feel compelled that you've got to do that. Okay. So, normally I would say to you, yeah, value stream mapping is a great tool because it has a lot of advantages. It brings everybody together in the process that don't know most people don't know the whole process, right? Number one, it makes obvious with data, if you do it right, the real problems that you have. And then most people who do value stream mapping, what we found, only do current state. And I just tell them that they just wasted their time. Because if you don't interrogate it and come up with a future state and then put a value stream Kaizen plan together to go after on a priority, the attainment of that future state, which, we typically go out roughly 9 months or so. Okay. Then all you did is waste your time. All you did is a bunch of, you did an engineering exercise without any meaning. Okay. The beauty about the future state is everybody together agrees on the vision about what we're going to do. Okay. And that's really neat because you got that value stream plan. Now you can take that value stream plan and actually focus on how we're going to execute those items on that value stream plan, right? Those Kaizens. However, I've also seen value stream mapping misused from the respect that we're working on the wrong stuff. Okay. So, your strategic deployment should lead you to what value streams are priority for your company. So, I almost like to think about strategic deployment as one big Pareto analysis, right? So don't become a slave to the tool. Okay. If you know that you've got a burning platform on a particular process, let's say, don't wait for the value stream mapping. You already know it's a problem. You know your customers are complaining. They're calling your business on a daily basis. Just go freaking fix it. And then come back when you're ready and you stabilize stuff to do the big analysis with VSM. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes, Mark, thank you. Thank you for your long answer. I completely understood.
You bet.
Hey, Mark, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Mark, I'm Chandan calling from London. So we have started our journey for lean and quite a couple of years before, and we have established some site level KPI. We call it SPQCD, safety, people, quality, cost, and delivery. And I'm curious to understand, as Danaher business system is so successful and it's very popular worldwide nowadays. So I'm trying to understand a little bit about what kind of key performance indicator your site normally measures for identifying or measuring the people engagement.
Okay. First of all, I love London. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. You guys can't do lean though because you drive on the wrong side of the road. Just to let you know. So, only kidding. I would. First of all, can I just correct you politely here, respectfully, and say that please put it in this order: safety, quality, delivery, and cost. Not safety, quality, cost, and delivery. Okay, maybe you just said it that way, but hopefully your training and all that has it in the order I just suggested. Okay, so and cost is last. Okay, that's really important. Employee engagement. Well, a lot of times we talk a good talk about it. Okay, but we don't have the processes to do it. And so one of the things that I talk about a lot with my clients is that you cannot have a value or a principle like employee engagement without having supporting processes that drive that value. Okay. And so let me give you a good example. A lot of people say, yeah, we believe in the principle that problems should be solved at the lowest possible level in the organization, right? And that's one of my clients actually evolved that saying the highest necessary, lowest possible level in the organization. Okay, everybody agrees with that, right? Okay, yeah, you know why? Because the closer you get to the work, the better the engagement, the better the understanding of the problem. Your best consultants are the people doing the work, right? And so now you say to yourself, okay, well, how much time do we give our employees to solve problems? We don't. Oh, okay. Do we have a problem-solving process to teach them? Fundamentals, Pareto, 5Y, right? Whatever. Well, not really. Well, yeah, we kind of have some. Okay, well, great. When have you trained your employees to do those, to learn that? Well, we haven't gotten to it yet, but we still believe in the notion that problems should be solved at the lowest level. So how the hell do you get engagement if you don't have the fundamental processes to engage your employees? Okay, so I think a lot of what you see on the employee engagement side is politically correct speak, where everybody kind of talks the game, but very rarely do people want to invest in doing it. Okay, and then as you look forward, you find out that you're not solving your problems, and you still have the same problems over and over again, and you haven't evolved. So does that answer your question? I mean, because I remember going over to England in one of our divisions over there in Brighton. Since you're in England, I'll use that as an example. Okay. And I did a CDAC. We had a test stand reject on a temperature controller. Our biggest fault was no fault found, right? And all the engineers looked at it, everybody. So I got a call from the senior executive. He said, Mark, I want you to go over and do this. I said, okay. So I didn't know anything about it. I'm not an engineer, I didn't, but I went over and I ran a CDAC process, which is called the cause and effect diagram with the addition of cards. And you bring a group of people together, operators, leaders, VPs, everybody else, and you start solving the process, right? Well, when you go through the fact cards on this, one of the operators said, the problem doesn't happen on the weekends. Because what they were doing is they were testing the product, okay, and the product would fail. And then they tested again and it wouldn't fail. So they called it no fault found. It was a good product, right? At least they thought it was. So the operator says, that problem never happens on the weekends when we work on the weekends. Really? Let's dive into that. We dove into it. Here's what we found. Their company shared the same building with another manufacturing company that wasn't ours. That company only worked 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, okay? They had a process that admitted electronic magnetic interference, EMI, right? And when they ran that process intermittently, when that process ran, it interfered with our test equipment and it gave us false readings. So the solution was to actually shield the test stands so it wasn't being interfered with by the adjoining company's process, okay? That idea came from an operator, okay? If we didn't engage the operator on the problem, I'm telling you, he had all these high-priced engineers looking at this. They couldn't figure it out, right? The engineer came up with the idea or the solution, all right? But if you don't have the form to engage people and the process to do so, then all you're doing, all your principles are slogans. They're not real, okay? So that's my answer to you about engaging employees.
But Mark, sorry for the interruption once again. Is there any specific key performance indicator we can set? For an example, we normally measure how many suggestions we are generating from the people, how many kaizens have been implemented, and employee retention, so those kind of things as a part of the people engagement. Is there anything global KPIs available which might be a good idea for the organization to measure people engagement?
Well, it all depends on whether or not your employees feel like they're engaged, right? You can have all the metrics in the world and all that. I don't like counting kaizens because that's an activity. I like counting business results. Your customers don't care how many kaizens you're in, okay? Maybe your employees don't either, right? Counting number of suggestions, and a little case study here. We had a suggestion system we put in at Jake Break, and we thought we were pretty cool. And so when I became general manager of the Asian business, I had Hino Motors as a client, and they're owned by Toyota, by the way. Tough client. Made us, but first 3P line, by the way, in the United States was done at the Hino line, my line in Jake Break. So that's Nikau's moonshining and all that. Anyway, we had a suggestion system. We were getting 2 suggestions per month per employee, and we thought we were pretty cool, right? When I went to Hino, they were getting 9 per month per employee. But the difference was they only counted implemented suggestions. And we, you know, if somebody came in and said, hey, I think we should paint the building pink, we counted that as a suggestion, right? Wasn't implemented, right? So big difference, right? When we asked them about it, and this is where we got the notion, they gave, on Friday afternoon, they gave the afternoon to the employees, and they took that time out of their tack time calculation, or the time available, okay? And they gave the employees the afternoon, and they gave them engineers, tool room, maintenance, to work on their suggestions, okay? So you can count all you want the number of suggestions, you can count all you want how many Kaizens you did. The real thing is, are you really making a difference? And do your employees really feel engaged? Okay, that to me would be the litmus test, as opposed to some measure that we come up with that we feel, you know, we're gonna measure our success on, where nobody else cares. All right. So I would just ask you to look at the things that you're doing and make sure they really have meaning and they are resonating with your workforce. Okay.
Hey,
Agreed.
Mark.
Thank you very much, Max.
You bet.
Mark?
Yes.
Hey, it's Colleen Sapalsa, and I came over to GE Aviation actually from Toyota about 10 years ago. And one of the main things that I've been stressing, going back to that importance, putting importance on respect for people,
Right.
has been how fundamental that is to driving lean transformation within companies. That connection has not yet been made, I should say. It's not viewed as a strategic imperative. So how would you suggest, for someone like myself, coming from Toyota in GE Aviation specifically, how would you suggest trying to change that, or show that, yes, it is a strategic imperative and very much the other side of the coin in a lean transformation?
Well, Colleen, I'll tell you this much. It's probably the number one reason why transformations fail. Okay, number one. As a matter of fact, I didn't talk a lot about it today. I actually did a paper on the history of our respect for people. And if you email me, I will send it to you. Okay. Matter of fact, I'll put it out with everything else on this.
Thank you, I will.
Okay. Yeah, I did a history on it. And believe it or not, respect for people goes all the way back to Taylor. Okay. In the early 1900s. And he got a black eye for what he did. And he really, that's not how he thought. I did a lot of research on this. Okay. I had to do it for my PhD. And I did it on that. And I built it up. When you go through Deming, all these guys, maybe with the exception of Schuhart, all these guys really talked about the RFP concepts. They didn't call it that then. And then in 2001, Toyota came up with the Toyota Way. And unfortunately, Toyota called it respect for people. And I wish they didn't, okay? Because when you look underneath the covers of what they mean in the stakeholders, they not only talk about employees, they talk about the shareholders, they talk about customers, they talk about society, they talk about the environment, and believe it or not, they also talk about their competition as being, they have to respect, okay? What company do you know that thinks about their competition that way, okay? And so it's mind-boggling to me. And the good news is that you have a CEO in Larry Culp that gets that, okay?
Yes.
So that's one thing that you guys really got going for you. It was why I bought a lot of stock, okay? Even though it's down a little bit now because of the virus, I bought a lot of stock when Larry took over, and I know Larry well. And so you get that with Larry, okay? And that will resonate in your company. So hopefully you're going to have some support over the course of time. But I would say, Colleen, that it is the number one reason why. And as a matter of fact, as I get into my PhD and I do my dissertation, I'm thinking about, it's a little early right now, but I'm thinking about actually talking about the invisible transformation, because a lot of the transformations that we talk about is all in respect to equipment and inventory and working capital and moving stuff around and facilities and, you know, stuff like that. But we're not talking about the invisible stuff that really is the failure mode for which is, you know, basically what you're saying with respect for people. And I will tell you this, I've not met one company yet that was really great at it, okay? But the biggest problem, Colleen, and I've got a client right now that's like this, who is unbelievably financially successful, okay, at the rate of a Danaher, okay? Their RFP, respect for people, is abysmal. And their biggest problem is they don't know that they have a problem. Okay.
Yep.
All right. That's their biggest problem.
Yep.
It's not that all the stuff they're doing is a problem to their employees and disrespecting people, but they don't recognize it as disrespect. Okay, so that's their biggest problem. And remember, Tashiano said, and you probably know this better than me, since you work there, no problem is problem. Remember, owner said that.
Yep.
And so that to me is so important. What you're bringing up, I almost apologize that I didn't talk more about it here in this presentation. Okay, because it's such an important thing. But if you go back into Toyota's website and look at what they mean by respect for people, you're going to find that. You know what I wish they called it, Colleen? I wish they called it respect for humanity.
Yeah.
Okay, that to me would have been a better word for it. They're not always as good as politicians at naming their programs, right? And I wish they had called it respect for humanity, because that to me would be more indicative of what this is all about. Because when people hear respect for people, they automatically gravitate towards employees, and it is that, but it's also a lot more. So
Yeah, and I think
hopefully I answered your
they
question
don't know
enough,
what
but-
they don't know what good looks like. So going back to that statement, they don't recognize there's a problem.
Correct. What's your role there, by the way? Just curious.
I'm a senior product manager there.
Oh, cool.
So really working in that lean space, but I've been trying to connect between this respect for people and the lean transformation for over a year, and it's just it's a big gap.
Well, you've got a battleship to move. First of all, that division that you're in is the biggest division and most profitable, I believe. And it's also the most challenged right now because of what's going on, not only with Boeing, but what's going on with the virus and nobody traveling and all that. So you guys,
Yep.
Right now, you're probably not going to get a lot of people to pay attention.
Right,
What you're
they're in
talking
crisis
about.
mode.
Yeah. But unfortunately, this is the kind of stuff you really need to pay attention to in times like this. But it's hard to do. I can really understand, what you might be going through.
Toughest work out there. Thank you, Mark. This is fantastic.
Okay, great. Yeah, stay in touch. Okay.
I will.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hey, Mark, this is Dan Papsadero. I work for Moog Incorporated, and we are starting to think about using policy deployment more effectively. However, there's great instability in a number of our factories, and I'm wondering if you have any advice about how to steer the policy deployment fledgling process towards like stability and not getting ahead of ourselves in terms of like breakthrough objectives. I'm very worried that it's kind of like your eyes getting big when you're hungry, that we're going to be signing ourselves up for crazy things when we aren't delivering on time. And so do you have any advice around kind of getting policy deployment going and the first steps?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. By the way, what company were you with, Dan?
It's Moog. Moog.
Oh, Moog. Yeah, I know
M-O-O-G.
Moog. Yeah, I was up to talk to you guys a while back, a few years ago, up in the Buffalo area, right? And
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, I actually went up there and met your CEO and presented, but I don't think you liked what I had to say.
Well, he is smitten with the Danaher business system. He does talk about Danaher when he talks about becoming a lean company. And I was a DVSL in Amherst back in like 2005. So I do have a lot of DBS background and understand how to use it, but it was an already established company, so I never went through true transformation and policy deployment when it first got started. So that's why I'm working through this now at Moog, and see it as like a challenge in terms of using it as a first step and not kind of getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, it's sad to hear that Moog still has those kind of problems, but they shouldn't at this point in time. But what I would say to you is this. First of all, as you know, since you have experience with it, policy deployment is a very there's a learning curve there, right? It takes an organization 12 to 18 months to get pretty good at it, because if you can't really learn how to solve problems, it's a plan, do, check, X cycle, right? And if you do all the matrices and all the bowling charts and all the meetings, but you're not fundamentally solving problems, all you've done is create a lot of nice wallpaper, right? And I'll kind of go back to the comment I made about the value stream question that was asked earlier, okay. Well, let's take a step back for a minute. Policy deployment, or what I renamed strategy deployment, okay, has a complexion to it, okay, and so what you have to first do is establish the complexion of your policy deployment, and you have to first say to yourself, okay, is this an operations play right now, or is it a growth play, or is it a hybrid, right? And at Danaher, what we said was, if your operations, your safety, quality, delivery, and cost are in such disarray, okay, that you've got firefighting, customer complaints, you're losing business, then your policy deployment should focus on SQDC or some, combination thereof. If we had a notion here too, Dan, that said you weren't allowed to grow if you had to earn the right to grow. Okay, so we would not allow companies. I remember George Sherman telling a guy out in California, general manager, he wanted to enter the European and Asian market, and George, it was a 10-minute strategy meeting. George says, John, he said, your quality and your lead times and delivery are abysmal. I'm not going to let you screw up Europe and Asia like you're screwing up North America. Fix your quality, fix your delivery, and I'll come back in a year and we'll talk about growth. I don't want you to spend $1 on growth, okay? So first thing you have to do is understand what the complexion of your policy deployment is going to be, business by business, and every business might be a little bit different, right? Then I would say to you is this, and I just gave this advice to a client, $1 billion acquisition of a bigger company. I told the president that don't do strategy deployment for the first year. He says, why? I said, you already know the 2 or 3 things you got to work on. Yeah, let's put some bowling charts in and let's do A3 countermeasures. Don't go through the dance of putting all the matrices together. And he said to me, well, Mark, that's what you guys do though. You sell that as a consulting thing. I go, yeah, we do, but it's not the right thing for you right now. You already know. Okay, I've been here for a day. I already know what your 3 issues are. Okay, let's just work on those. And now I'll maybe say, let's do value stream mapping there, okay? I don't need the sophistication at this point to tell me what the 3 burning platforms are in this business, okay? So if I'm gonna come in and have the corporate guys come in and have you go through the whole dog and pony and putting all the matrices together and all the meetings and everything else, it's gonna be a big distraction, okay? Now that may sound kind of crazy to you, but that's how I think, right? And so I said, just don't do it right now. Yeah, you're going to need it eventually. But right now it's the old, hey, look, my family's in the house. The fire hose is here, and I got the manual here. What am I going to work on? I'm going to pick up the hose, or am I going to pick up the manual? Okay, to me, the strategy deployment, in some regards, is almost like, working on the manual and doing root cause problem solving, where, in fact, I'm going to do root cause problem solving, but I already know the 2 or 3 areas I really need to work on, okay? So my advice to you would be, don't become enamored with the tool and don't just gravitate towards that because corporate says you have to do it. Use some common sense. I think eventually you have to do it. It's the right thing for your business. I really do believe that. It's a powerful, powerful tool, but you got to bring it in at the right time, okay? So that would be, I don't know if Dan, if that helps you or not, but that's my thinking on that. Almost the same speech I gave on VSM.
Yep, the way I'm interpreting it is, if we're going to use it, use a light, quick, dirty version to identify the fact that we need to pick up the fire hose and start using it, and then in subsequent iterations we become more sophisticated and use it for growth. That's kind of the approach that I'm taking. It sounds like it'd be kind of in line with what you're saying. So thank you.
Yeah, and maybe you can bypass some of the matrices and just go right to the fact that you need to understand the components of whatever area you need to go after, and then drive teams in action plans, all the things you would do in PD anyway, okay? All I'm saying is, unless you don't know, don't go through the mechanics and waste time for it to tell you something that you already know, okay? So,
Right.
that's all I'm saying to
Got
you. Use some common sense. That's all.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? I know we're a little bit over on time. Okay. Well, I don't hear anybody else. Thank you very much. I'm going to just finish up here. In the back of this presentation, when you get it, there's a bunch of references to, so PhD-like, isn't it? A bunch of references where I got a lot of this data, so you guys can, look at these references and actually, as you can see there's a lot of Toyota references that I used. Okay. And those are my books. That's my old book and my new book. My new book just came out in April. And if you guys are looking at any kind of bulk orders, you can get a 20% discount. So let me know about that. There's really no limit on bulk orders. So I tried to get a number from them and they said no. Anybody wants to order any kind of what they might consider bulk, that's fine. Or you can buy it through Amazon. And so that's, why lean transplants fail and what to do about it. So a lot of people talk about why they fail, but they don't talk about what to do about it. And so I offer 4 or 5 things in there that I think companies need to think about. And one of them, quite frankly, is the culture and respect for people. And the other is, the whole notion of getting back to basics, right? So Art Byrne actually wrote the foreword to the book. Art's a good mentor and friend. I've known Art now for, 30 plus years. So anyway, that book just came out. It's doing very well, by the way, on the charts. So if you guys get a chance to pick it up, I'd appreciate it. And any other questions, there's my contact details. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So connect with me if you're not. And then we'll go from there. Okay. So that's the end of this. Hearing no other questions, I'm gonna sign off now. But I do appreciate everybody's time and attention. And from around the world, Peru and London and some other great places. And so thank you very much and look forward to future webinars that I'll be doing on. And if you guys have any ideas on what you'd like to see, just email me and let me know. And we'll try to get those into the queue down the line as we move forward. Okay. So thank you very much and have a great day.